Imagine a world where kings and dukes gathered in tents, not palaces, to decide the fate of nations. In May 1393, a small, war-torn village called Leulinghen, near the banks of the Somme River in France, became the unlikely stage for one of the most crucial peace talks in medieval history. The village was so devastated by war that the delegates from England and France had to live in tents, not grand halls. This was no ordinary meeting. It was a last-ditch effort to end a conflict that had been raging for over half a century. The main players were powerful men: John of Lancaster from England, Philip of Burgundy and his brother, John of Berry from France, and several other nobles and church leaders. They were all trying to find a way to stop the 100 Years' War, a brutal struggle that had drained both countries of their resources and countless lives. The stakes were high, and the challenges were immense. The King of France, Charles VI, was there in spirit but not in body. He was staying at a nearby Benedictine abbey, a place of relative safety and comfort. Charles was a deeply religious man, and his mind was often on spiritual matters, especially the idea of a crusade against the Turks. However, Charles was not always in his right mind. He suffered from periods of madness, which made him an unpredictable and unreliable leader. Despite this, he was willing to make peace, just as the King of England was. The peace talks were held in a simple chapel with a thatched roof. The walls were adorned with tapestries showing ancient battles, but when Lancaster pointed out that these war scenes were not appropriate for peace talks, the tapestries were quickly replaced with scenes from the life of Christ. This small change reflected the gravity of the situation. The delegates sat in a hierarchy, with the most senior nobles like Lancaster and Berry on elevated chairs, while others, including counts, prelates, and knights, lined the walls. One of the most interesting figures at the parley was Leon V de Lusignan, who claimed the title of King of Armenia. However, his kingdom had been reduced to the island of Cyprus, which he had lost to the Turks. Leon was a passionate advocate for a crusade, urging both the French and English to unite against the common enemy. His presence highlighted the broader context of the talks, the threat of the Ottoman Turks, who were expanding their empire and posing a significant danger to Christian Europe. Another key figure was the Spanish cardinal Pedro de Luna, who represented Pope Clement VII of the Avignon papacy. The schism in the Church, where there were two rival popes, one in Avignon and one in Rome, was a major issue. De Luna tried to persuade the English to recognize the legitimacy of the Avignon papacy, but Lancaster was not having it. He accused the Avignon cardinals of causing and sustaining the schism, which had divided Christendom. Burgundy, however, was more pragmatic. He suggested that they set aside the schism for the sake of peace, and leave it to scholars to resolve later. The talks quickly revealed the deep divisions between the two sides. The French demanded that the English raise the city of Calais, a crucial port that had been in English hands since 1347. The English, on the other hand, insisted that the French fulfill all the terms of the Treaty of Bretigny, which had been signed in 1360. Calais was a symbol of English strength and a vital economic asset, and the English were not willing to give it up. The French, in turn, argued that territories that had never sworn allegiance to the English crown could not be forcibly transferred. These major demands were so far apart that they seemed almost impossible to reconcile. However, both sides were tired of the war and wanted to find a way forward. They began to focus on smaller, more manageable issues. This is where the negotiations became particularly challenging. Gloucester, one of the English delegates, was known for his dour and suspicious nature. He was deeply mistrustful of the French and their use of language. He believed that the French used ambiguous words and phrases that could be twisted to their advantage. Gloucester insisted that every proposal be put in writing and carefully examined to ensure there were no hidden meanings or double interpretations. This emphasis on precise language was a real obstacle to making progress. While many English lords spoke French, it was not their native language, and they often felt insecure about their fluency. This language barrier made Gloucester even more cautious and reluctant to agree to anything. He saw it as a way to protect the English from being tricked by the French, but it also made the talks drag on much longer than necessary. To try to influence Gloucester, Burgundy brought in Robert the Hermit, a holy man known for his eloquence and divine mission. Robert pleaded with Gloucester to stop opposing the peace, arguing that the ongoing war between England and France was weakening Christendom and making it more vulnerable to the Turkish threat. Gloucester's response was defensive, but he eventually had to relent, at least to some degree, in deference to the king's wishes. In the end, the peace talks did not achieve a final and lasting agreement. However, they did result in a 4-year truce, during which time various disputed territories were to be returned to their original owners. This truce was a significant step forward, even if it was not the permanent peace that everyone had hoped for. Just when it seemed like some progress had been made, tragedy struck. In June 1393, while the last clauses of the truce were being finalized, King Charles VI of France suffered another bout of madness. This was not his first episode, but it was more severe and lasted for 8 months. Charles's condition was so dire that he did not recognize himself as king, his wife, or even his children. He became obsessed with defacing the royal coat of arms and was terrified of his own wife, Isabeau of Bavaria. This mental breakdown had a profound impact on the kingdom, as Charles was unable to rule effectively. Charles's madness was not an isolated incident. It was a recurring condition that would plague him for the rest of his life, which lasted until 1422. During his periods of insanity, the kingdom was left in a state of uncertainty and instability. The power struggle between the factions of Orleans and Burgundy intensified, and the English took advantage of the chaos to launch new invasions. France, once a powerful and unified nation, was reduced to a state of disarray and vulnerability. The Queen, Isabeau of Bavaria, was a central figure in this period of turmoil. She was a complex and often controversial figure. Initially, she was seen as a beautiful and charming queen, but her reputation suffered due to her husband's illness and her own actions. Isabeau was accused of being a sorceress and of having an affair with the Duke of Orleans, who was her husband's brother. These rumors were fueled by the Burgundian faction, who saw her as a threat to their power. Despite the accusations, Isabeau remained a powerful figure at court, using her influence to advance her own interests and those of her family. One of the most striking aspects of Charles's madness was the way it was treated. In the Middle Ages, mental illness was often seen as a punishment from God or the work of the devil. Various treatments were tried, including bleeding, baths, and exorcisms. A charlatan named Arnaut Gilham claimed to have a book given to Adam by God that could cure all afflictions, but his methods were ineffective and he was eventually discredited. Other quacks and remedies were also attempted, but nothing seemed to help Charles. The obsession with sorcery and witchcraft was a reflection of the broader anxieties of the time. The Church, divided by the schism and facing challenges from dissenting movements, saw sorcery as a threat to its authority. In 1398, theologians at the University of Paris declared that the black arts were spreading through society, leading to increased persecution of suspected witches and sorcerers. Despite the challenges, Charles's periods of sanity allowed him to resume some of his duties as king, though in a mostly ceremonial capacity. He and Isabeau had several more children during this time, but the question of paternity was often in doubt. Isabeau, feeling humiliated by her husband's illness and neglect, turned to a life of luxury and scandal. She became involved in political intrigues and accumulated a vast personal fortune, often at the expense of the kingdom. The political landscape of France during this period was marked by shifting alliances and power struggles. Isabeau supported the Duke of Orleans as regent, but when he was assassinated by the Duke of Burgundy, she switched her allegiance to the Burgundians. This lack of stability and leadership contributed to the decline of France and made it easier for the English to invade and occupy large parts of the country. In the end, the reign of Charles VI was characterized by a series of tragic events and missed opportunities. The peace talks at Leulinghen, while not a complete failure, did not bring the lasting peace that was desperately needed. The madness of the king, the political infighting, and the resurgence of the English threat all contributed to a period of decline and suffering for France. The legacy of this era was a country that was deeply divided, impoverished, and vulnerable to external threats. The story of Charles VI and his reign serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of power and the devastating consequences of internal strife.